Hello, and welcome to Executive Edge, where insights meet action. Brought to you by Hartman's team of executive advisors. This video series delivers thoughtful takes and expert analysis on the top trends shaping technology, business, and industry. Designed to fit into your busy schedule, each episode runs 20 minutes or less, breaking down the innovations, risks, and opportunities that matter most. No fluff, just the insights you need to stay informed and ahead of the curve. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to Executive Edge. I'm Lauren Langer, the Director of Marketing here at Hartman Executive Advisors. Today we're exploring how higher education institutions and nonprofits are responding to a perfect storm of economic pressure, shifting federal priorities, and evolving expectations around the transparency and impact. The big questions today is how can these mission-driven organizations adapt and even thrive by rethinking how they're using data, automation, and strategy? As traditional funding sources tighten and operational demands grow, leaders are being challenged to make smart, fast decisions. That means leveraging data in ways that they may have not before and automating where it counts, and then finding new innovative paths to financial stability. Joining me today are two of my colleagues who work closely with institutions navigating these very challenges. Gregg is one of our executive advisors here at Hartman. Gregg helps higher ed and nonprofit leaders align technology and operations with long-term strategy, especially in times of uncertainty. Juan is our executive advisor for business intelligence and analytics at Hartman Executive Advisors, and he brings a deep expertise in data strategy, automation, and performance optimization, helping organizations turn information into action and impact. So let's get the conversation started.
Sure.
Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
First questions to you guys. What are the key challenges that higher education institutions face due to the shifts that are going on today, and how can they adapt their research funding strategies to remain competitive?
Yeah, I think everybody's familiar with the legislative changes that are happening of late. And I think there's still more to learn about really what is going to happen, but higher education institutions and nonprofits and frankly industries, across the spectrum are trying to figure out what all this legislation could mean to them personally. With regard to higher ed, they're talking about cutting funding for institutions that get a lot of their revenue from research. So that is causing research institutions to scramble a little bit to figure out how they react to that. There's also even changes in the student loan program, and what majors may be funded as part of a student loan and what others may not, or at what level will they be funded. So there's more scrutiny over the monies that the government is giving out relative to student loans. And there's an emphasis now emerging on promoting more vocational education for people. So there's a lot going on. Nobody really has all the answers yet. As we film this or tape this, we're just coming out of the week where the big, beautiful bill, so to speak, has been signed. So over the coming days, we'll find out more. But it is causing a lot of concern for educational institutions and nonprofits appropriately. There's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, so let me just add a little bit to that. And it's hard for institutions to cut staff, right? I mean, a lot of the private institutions, they have a large number of faculty who are also researchers, right? So they do research part of the time and then they teach classes, right? So finding the right balance between teaching and research has always been there, right? It's just that cutting one side leaves you kind of hanging dry on the other one, right? So cutting staff is difficult. Plus, new enrollments are not growing a lot, right? So they cannot raise tuition because in some of these private institutions, tuition is already pretty high. So Gregg was talking about how can they increase loans, and what I have seen also is that they're starting to add more scholarships and in fact tapping into their endowment to fund some of those scholarships for students, right? So they can keep at least some level of growth on enrollment and try to solve that equation of less fundamental research and without having to let people go.
And Juan, you talked about determining how maybe to cut some staff or make other changes within the organization. Often we see that this is kind of a new challenge for many of these higher education institutions. And so they don't have the data, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the system to even help them from a data perspective navigate through this challenge.
I think that's a good point. I think, yeah, I mean, technology has always been there, right? Data silos are still there, right? So how do they solve that, and how can they have a better view into, how, the different operations, different programs, different departments, and really understand where perhaps they can cut costs, right? So I think one of the challenges, Greg, is the fact that they don't control all of their own systems, right? They depend sometimes on the university-wide IT department, and some of their systems are managed by the university, and the schools themselves don't have much control over them, right? So even getting the information that they need is difficult because they don't control it, right? And then bringing their own systems and the data from those systems together with the data from the university, it's also a challenge, right? So yeah, I agree with you. They're facing difficult challenges on the technology side as well.
That's a great point, you guys, talking about, data silos and not necessarily having access to all of their data. But at the same time, we kind of know that one of the things that they're currently trying to balance right now is the need to take the data that they do have and balance, the need for open data sharing with the monetization of that data and how to turn that data into more revenue streams. Like, so we're talking about funding, stuff like that. So, can you tell me a little bit more about that and, what that must be like for them today, and what can they do to try to, use their data when they finally can get it together to monetize it and create new revenue streams, but at the same time, that challenge that they're experiencing with, not necessarily having access to the data that they need.
Yes, no, that's definitely a challenge, right? And keep in mind that both on the nonprofit side and on the education side, a lot of the content, right, or a lot of the research that is being done is shared publicly, right? Because, and that makes sense because the federal government is funding some of this research, right? So it's for the benefit of all, and that makes a lot of sense, right? But at the same time, these researchers and even nonprofits develop new tools or new technologies that they also share in an open source model, right? And that's been the norm for a long time. But now, given this, new environment on less funds, less grants, they are rethinking about whether they should perhaps monetize some of those assets. One of our clients has a data product, and they've been trying to monetize this data product for several years, and this is really a great tool for other schools, and one of the challenges that they've been facing is that some of these other universities, they're interested in using this data product, but they don't want to pay for it, right? Because that legacy mindset, right? So so we're trying to find the right model for that. We're working with this particular client and find the right model in order to get that monetization. On the nonprofits, they also need to monetize their data by having a 360 view of their members, right? So they need to better understand what they need, certifications, right? Or webinars, right? Who are the different audiences that require certain skills, and how can we engage them and bring them into these certificate paths that can bring additional revenue. So I just gave you two examples, Lauren, on how they can use data and information or proprietary technology to monetize those assets.
Yeah. You keyed a thought for me there, Juan, and we talk about this a lot with all of our clients, but data really is an asset and it needs to be viewed as such, right? And often we run into clients that don't really understand that concept until we we work with them for a bit. But in both these cases, there is data to be leveraged to the benefit of the organization, whether it be higher ed or nonprofit. In higher ed, they have, some of them, treasure troves of information, that they have kept relatively internal. But now there exists an opportunity to share that for a fee with other universities and other research agencies to help to monetize that, to help, because it's very expensive to curate, and have this data and run it on a platform that supports the research. So to be able to recoup some of those costs, at least, will help the organization. On the nonprofit side, it really is, the typical funding for nonprofit, at least the trend I'm seeing is, people that provide funding to nonprofits, they're kind of stuck right now too. They're trying to figure out the future of the economic situations, and, they may have limited funding to invest. They want to see how this time plays out. So the nonprofit being able to do more outreach, more awareness of who has given to them in the past and what kind of projects are important to them, and even going as far as specifically defining projects, whether they be their own outreach projects or internal to help the nonprofit kind of weather this storm, automation projects, efficiency projects, but naming those, defining those, and then going out and seeking specific funding for a specific project rather than shooting more with a wider net. And we're starting to see some successes that way. There's plenty of money to be given, but it has to be given to a targeted opportunity.
Yeah, and Greg, I mean, you're talking about increasing outreach, right? But in order to do that, they need to have their data clean, centralized, right? Yeah. They need to break those silos, be able to identify the audiences that they need to do outreach with, right? And honestly, many nonprofits are still behind in their data maturity, right? So that's where we're working with them to help them increase that data maturity.
You made a really good point. Let's zoom out a bit. And you talk a little bit about these treasure troves of data that people seem to have. Given the fact that they have this an enormous amount of great intel that they probably don't realize what insights that they could get out of it, what's their first step? If they've gotten to the point that they realize, okay, we need to turn our revenue, our data into, we need to monetize it and turn it into new services. We need to turn it into, new revenue sources. We in general need to know what we can learn from our data. And they know that there is information there to be had, information to kind of glean from things.
Yeah.
What's their first step, and when you guys are talking to people, where are they typically at right now?
Lauren, I would add another item to your list there. The data can prove very valuable to the organization itself as it's trying to figure out how to find opportunities to reduce cost or become more effective, more efficient, right? I think the first step is kind of what I alluded to earlier, is understanding that your data is an asset. It's not just operational, helping you, process transactions throughout the day, but over a period of time, data collected provides intelligence, that can then be assimilated and used to help drive decisions. And so maybe, Juan, you could talk to how to do that. But I think the first step is a recognition that the data can be used to help leverage their way out of the circumstances they find themselves in today.
Yeah, and I think that recognition is key, because many clients, many organizations, they've been doing one-offs, right? Let's bring this data, let's pull these, but they don't have a strategy, right? A practical way to where is the biggest value that we can derive from data, and how can we marshal our resources towards that goal, right? So they haven't done that. I think at the tactical level, Lauren, also one of the first steps is eliminating manual work. I mean, it sounds a little bit incredulous that in 2025 we're still talking about eliminating manual data processing and manual data analysis, right? If I am a CEO, I'm like, I've been investing on technology all these years, and you're telling me that we still spend hours or days doing manual Excel sheets, right? Working manually in Excel. So how can we eliminate that redundant, low value spreadsheet mania load and really free up some of these resources and people to do more analysis, more, identifying trends and doing some of the stuff that Gregg was talking about.
When you're talking to clients, both of you, like when you're starting to have this conversation for the first time, where do you typically find people are in that journey when they begin the conversation with us? Are they typically, do they realize that they have a potential asset already? Or are they typically at the point where, like you said, Juan, they're doing manual processes. They may not realize like this data is actually could make a huge difference in how I run my organization, but also this data could bring new revenue sources towards my organization. Like, where are they in that kind of pendulum typically?
I think generally, broadly speaking, I mean, certainly we interact with clients that get this from the start, right? But I've found that these sort of economic challenges that these particular industries face right now kind of spawns a desire to look at things differently than they have in the past, right? And so while intuitively they may know we've got to get more efficient, we know about these spreadsheet managed workloads and all these things, they don't really know that by fixing that stuff, it can help create new revenue, more efficiency. I mean, let's we've seen efficiency gains that are just crazy. The effort to go out and raise $1 million versus an efficiency that recoups $1 million in expense. I mean, the expense reduction might be easier in the end, right? So I think it's the challenge always spawns a new, fresh look at things. And I think some business leaders that haven't had to deal with this in the past are now becoming open to it. But even then, when you say it, well, you got to get more efficient. You got to use your data. You got to have KPIs. You got to measure to things. They go, yeah, but how? Okay, I get it now. It's important to do that now. I never had to do that before, but now I do. But tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
Great point. I very often we are having a lot of conversations where it comes down to the how. My last question to you both would be, what if someone's listening today and it's like that's exactly where I am? What's the next step for them? Like the first thing that they should do, like, outside of call someone to help you out. Like what's the first thing you would say to them? Like, well, first step is you need to do X. What would that be for you guys?
Well, I will repeat something that I've heard Gregg say before, right? This is not the time to cut on technology. This is the time to double down on your technology investments, right? They need to keep that in mind, that technology is not really a cost center. It can be a force for growth, for new opportunities of revenue, right? So to me, that would be the first thing, Gregg.
Yeah, that's become one of my recent mantras as I talk to people. I had a CEO recently. We've been going through this process of identifying potential, call them automation projects, and we were revealing to him the cost of this project, and it was going to be somewhere around 100,000, which in his world will be the most expensive IT project he's ever considered, right? It's a big number. And so we're going through it and around and around. He's like, you got to be kidding me. Where am I going to find $100,000? And I said, okay, let's flip to the other side of the coin. Our conservative estimates are that you will get close to $1 million of value creation out of this project. Increased revenue, decreased expense, more actionable data, hits all those kinds of things. And I said, wouldn't it be true if I could find more of these $100,000 investments that would yield $1 million each or $500,000, whatever your number is? You'd want to do more of them, not less, right? And he's like, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. And so I think sometimes there's a mindset, Juan alluded to it, that IT is this expense bucket. Had a CEO years ago tell me it was a black hole. You put money into it and nothing ever comes out. Well, that's just not true. IT can really create that business value and really help an organization weather through some uncertain times. And I would say the ones that do it now are going to be ahead of their competition a year from now. One of the other questions I like to ask is, when I have clients that are faced with similar challenges, what are you going to wish a year from now you would have done today? Like, think about it with that filter on, and that seems to kind of break the ice too. But tactically, sometimes we have to find little things to test the water, show there's value, and then build on it. But I think, Juan, I think you would agree, once we can articulate and help a business leader understand these concepts fully, we don't meet any resistance.
Yeah, and Lauren, I think at the end of the day, how we help our clients is, okay, where are the pain points, right? We really go into each business unit, each department, each functional area, understand what they do, how they add value, and what are the current pain points. It could be data, it could be automating some processes, right? It could be replacing an old system, right? But what are those pain points? Identifying those opportunities to improve, and then prioritize them, right? And so that leads to, Gregg and I have been working with a client where we implemented a new IT governance process, and this was completely new to their leadership, and they were blown away by it, right? It's like, this is just great. This gives us all the visibility that we needed in order to understand where the priorities are and how we need to invest not only our time but also resources, right? So I think those are key things that we can help with.
It's so much. You've given me a lot to think about, and I would imagine our listeners a lot to think about as well. So big thank you, Gregg and Juan, for sharing your insights on how higher education and nonprofit leaders can navigate today's funding challenges with clarity and confidence. Whether it's adapting research strategies, embracing automation, balancing transparency, and diversifying revenue streams, and how to make the most out of their data. It's clear the resilience and really requires innovation and intentionality. So anyways, if you found today's conversation helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Executive Edge for more executive level insights on the trend shaping mission-driven organizations. Again, thank you, Gregg. Thank you, Juan, for your time today. And until next time, I'm Lauren Langer, and this has been Executive Edge.